about acting because that's what I kind of do. Not as much about filming, so I thought I'd talk about acting. As a starter, how many actors on here can you name? Yeah. Anyone? Any of them?
Tom Hardy.
Yes. Thank you. My favourite actor, legend. Well, the movie's called Legend. He is also a legend. And this movie is insane. Highly recommend it. Essentially, he acts as both of them. And also, if you want to watch, I highly recommend to watch the sort of the making of, because it's just genius acting. Because he's not actually, he can't be himself in two places. So he has to pretend that he's sort of acting in front of himself. So yeah, that's a great example. This is Withnail I. Has anyone heard of it? Withnail.
That's a great movie.
Yes. Awesome movie, thank you. Yeah, such a good movie. And then that, of course, is, anyone know? David Tennant. Absolute legend. This is him at the RSC. I saw him at the RSC as well. I used to live in Cheltenham, which is like 20 minutes away from the RSC. Sorry, Royal Shakespeare Company. Absolutely amazing actor. So he's more theatre than went into other stuff like Doctor Who and I don't know, other TV series and movies. Great actor as well. Alright, okay, history of theatre. Sort of go through it a bit. It sort of started as performance of like tribal rituals, dance. That's where performance came from. It was just sort of a way to get the community together. Then sort of in Egypt it became sort of a bit of a bigger thing. People started to, it was like worshipping of the gods, and then it became a big celebration and a performance in itself in the worship of their gods, essentially. Then we have the Greeks, of course, sort of the introduction of the chorus, sort of the singers. They were sort of dressed as half goat, half human storytellers in a group, and they would sort of sing to sort of give the tone of the story. They mainly talk sort of about myths and legends, because that's what they were interested about, sort of about the lesson you could learn from performance and the acting, essentially. Yeah, and they were sort of more storytelling vessels, so it was more about the writing and what was said rather than the actor on stage. You know, they would wear masks, happy or sad masks. It wasn't really, you know, them acting per se. And then we have the first known play, or the earliest surviving play of the Greeks, which is Aeschylus. This is sort of the first record we have, basically, dialogue between more than one actor. Anyone know what the significance of these 4 words are? No? Anyway,
Got it.
First, this, well, it's a tragedy actually. It's about Aeschylus, who sort of fights in the Battle of Marathon against the Persians. Sort of mid-part way through the story, he gets captured in Syracuse by some heretic. And then at the end, he dies strangely because an eagle thinks his head is a rock and drops a turtle on his head. So that's sort of where comedy came in the end. So yeah. Then we have the Romans. They sort of developed it a bit more, became a bit more formal. Dark Ages, nothing happened. Then we get the Middle Ages. Shakespeare happened. Then we get to the more like what I'm going to talk about, which is 1850s, and we get melodrama. Anyone know what melodrama is?
It's like overacting?
Yes, exactly. So melodrama is sort of where pantomime is like the prime example of melodrama. It's where people go on stage and overact and sort of are melodramatic with big gestures and try and over-dramatize what they're doing, essentially. And what I'm going to talk about is the reaction to melodrama. So after the 1850s, people were tired of overacting. People were tired of going to a show and or a performance and knowing what was going to happen, essentially. So then we get realism, and this is where, well, this is sort of what we do today. This is the norm for movies and things that actors today. That all started with Stanislavski, his method, and then it went into method acting. It was called the Stanislavski system, so it had a few different things. I'm also going to talk about that, and how you become a character and his way of inflecting realism rather than melodrama, which is I'm not a fan of melodrama. I don't know if people like pantomimes. Anyone like pantomimes?
Pantomimes is fun.
Yeah. But they can, see, that's the thing. You have to be in the mood for a pantomime. Like if you're going to a performance and you sort of want to enjoy it in the way that I want to see something that's going to move me, maybe pantomime is more just a jokey thing and not as serious. So if you go there expecting to have a good time and a good laugh, you're going to have fun. But if you go in there to sort of think, I want to see something a bit more serious, a bit more realistic, then pantomime isn't your thing. For me, melodrama is a bit shallower, I mean it's just an opinion, than realism, because there's not as much of a process behind it, but it's fun. I enjoy it. I enjoy watching it. Okay, next one. Right, okay, we just talked about that. Opera did melodrama, and then this is when sort of you get Shakespeare all in the classic clothes, and then they're all to be or not to be is way overdone now, it's sort of a bit more inflective. So he's looking at the skull in Hamlet. I don't know if you know Hamlet, but it's sort of a bit more relaxed, whereas melodrama's over the top, as I just said. And there's Red Riding Hood. Oh. Okay, now we have the Stanislavski system. Essentially, he sort of is the main practitioner. He sort of made acting what it is today, what actors do today, what they are today. He decided that the rehearsal was more important than the performance. That was his opinion, and it's sort of what a lot of actors think now as well. So it was more about how rehearsing and learning about your character's environment inflected the performance. So it wasn't like you got there and you know what you're going to do. It's like you know your step, you know what you're going to say, you know how you're going to say it. It's more about before you're learning the lines, but you're also learning about your character and what he did, where he lived, when he lived, what his past was. I mean, a lot of actors also make that up so that then when they perform it comes naturally, and that's what the conscious into unconscious is referring to. When you go on stage, you rehearse so much in the way that who your character is and what your character does that it just comes naturally. And that's where realism comes in. It's a more realistic performance and natural performance, and that's what he wanted. So yeah, objective performance, surroundings, past, other characters. Now, the most infamous sort of form of part of his system is emotion memory. And this is where, when you're sort of preparing for a performance, you sort of, I don't know if you have a scene where the other character's your brother and your brother dies. It's sort of where you think back into a horrible part of your life and try and remember the emotion you felt when someone you loved died. And this is where it became quite controversial, because it drains you, like physically drains you, if you're reenacting or trying to bring back up those emotions of when you felt that. It can sometimes get quite dangerous, and eventually it got scrapped because people were, their mental health, they just couldn't deal with it. The fact that they were trying to remember all these horrible things that had happened to them, and they basically became depressed because the acting became too much and too draining. Okay, yeah, magic if you're interested, search that. Okay, now we have method acting. This is a bit different from Stanislavski. Strasberg is sort of more American, or became adapted or more integrated into American film and theatre. This is more about your own character development, so inventing what your character did. So if you've read a script or your lines in a movie, then you sort of try and make up what your character's done before then, so that when you're doing your lines, in your head you're thinking about what he's done. Does that make sense? Is everyone getting this? Kind of? Yes? So this is more about you developing a character in your mind, who your character is, so that then you can go on stage and perform it more accurately, essentially. Yeah, so then more repeatable, consistent performances, you're able to flick into it much quicker rather than... so the performance is more pre-made, whereas Stanislavski, the performance is developed through rehearsal. So that's that. Application. Right, so when I've acted on stage, I've mainly sort of used Stanislavski. So for me, it's more about the environment. I was doing, the last play I did was Death and the Maiden, and I had to play a character who was living during the Chilean, what's his name? Pinochet, when Pinochet was ruling in that time. And my character had sort of taken advantage of that time. He was just misusing all his power as a doctor, in this case. And my character had been accused of raping this woman. And in the play, he is interrogated by this woman, and I have to try and pretend that I'm not innocent. Or sorry, not guilty. And so that's quite difficult, obviously. I hope you don't think I'm a rapist. So I had to sort of go into that character's life and think about what he was thinking. Why was he doing what he was doing? Why did the environment he was in make him do what he did? So it's really about the psyche of your character. So in this case, he had so much power in his position as a doctor, and lack of doctors and men in that time because of Pinochet's rule and just the terrible torture that people went through in that time. Just men had more power and got away with a lot more, and he just took advantage of that. And that's what's difficult about acting, I would say. You've got to imagine things you don't want to imagine some of the time. You've got to try and be someone you don't want to be. So when you go on stage, you are that person, essentially. That's what Stanislavski believed in. It's more about you learning your character, learning the environment he lived in, his history, his past, so that then when you're on stage, it becomes more unconscious, more, unintentional, like, how do you say it? It's not like decided before you go on stage, it's more something that develops as you're on stage. That's essentially what his idea was. Then in film, film is quite different to being on stage. When you're on stage, you have to project a bit more than when you're being filmed, for example. When you're being filmed, the slightest inflection of your face, of an expression, of something that you do can be caught by the camera. When you're on stage, the crowd can be really far away from you, so there's no way they're going to see that slight little look towards the other person, or, I don't know, look of fear, look of sudden sort of doubt that they can catch in a film, for example. So on stage, you have to be much more obvious in what you do, and there it is a bit more about the gesture, so you could say it's more melodramatic. So it's more about, so it's not pantomime, but it's more about showing the audience through action, through your body language, essentially, rather than the inflection of your face. And I'd say, it was weird for me because I'd never actually done anything other than be on stage while I was acting. So when we were doing some filming, it's weird because you don't have any reaction from the audience. You don't have anyone to sort of bounce off of. When you're on stage and there's a crowd in front of you, it feels real. The performance sort of builds. You get the anticipation. You get sort of like that other character that's there that gives you something to bounce off of. But when you're in front of a camera, there's no one. There's the guy who's sitting behind the camera who has no clue what you're talking about. And exactly. And you've got to try and give those more subtle hints, those slight inflections, those less big actions, so that people understand what you're trying to say. And that's what I've loved to learn and being part of this club, and that there are those subtle differences. And I remember I was watching this documentary. I don't know if you guys know Michael Caine. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's absolute legend. And he was doing this thing where when you're on stage, there's no camera to look at. There's no, like I just explained. But when you're looking at a camera, if both your eyes are looking at the lens, when someone's got like a front-on shot of you talking to someone, in a movie they have a shot of someone who's actually talking to someone else, but you see their face. Yeah. So in this case, it's a slight thing of holding one eye, this eye, on the lens, and this eye on where you perceive the person to be, and that makes it realistic. If you're looking at the camera itself, just the camera, it's more, two eyes looking at the lens. And it's difficult to notice these things when you're watching a movie and you're just into the story, but those subtle things are so important when you're trying to make it realistic.
Yeah, easy to see on a close-up.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Alright. Okay, so now, this is part of Withnail I. This is the kitchen scene. Do you remember the kitchen scene?
I remember, I've seen this movie like
Oh,
5 or 6 times.
So good. So this is Richard E. Grant, absolute legend of an actor. So I'm just going to play the video, and I'm going to, after you've seen it, these guys aren't like this in real life, if you've seen them. Not at all in any way, shape or form, but they're so convincing in this video. And I just want to, we'll go around afterwards, and I just want to see what you think you do to prepare to try and act like that. Is that alright? Everyone okay with that? Yeah? And they're living in a flat that no one should be living in it, and they're just sort of, well, they're rats. That was the reference there in the middle. So yeah, they're just very low. They're just low lives essentially, and they're trying to survive. And the movie isn't all it's about is trying to stay sane with that, because that's a big thing that actors go through. I mean, when I talk to actors, this is the reason I want to do a degree first, because most actors get rejected and rejected and rejected and get depressed, and all they have to go back on is a pub job. And that's a big problem, people, their dream is to become an actor, and then all they have is a pub job in the end, if they don't make it. Or some of them become teachers or drama teachers. And this happens to a lot of actors. They sort of think, sort of the American dream style thing, we're going to make it, we're going to make a lot of money, we're going to be famous. And then when it doesn't happen, it hits you like suddenly faced with reality. So yeah, that's essentially what it's about.
Cool, that was useful, because I would say, first of all, just stop doing the washing up. Like, turn your home into a tip.
Yeah.
And think of all your failures. Maybe make a little list of them.
Yeah.
That's pretty easy to do. I've got plenty. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. Any ideas? What you would do to prepare for that?
No smart cons.
Nothing?
That's that emotion, the psychological setting in the two persons, both your own and the one you're acting towards.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, would be
Sort of
very useful.
try and relate them, or
yeah, both try to understand each.
Yeah.
And then of course the relation between them.
Exactly. That's what it's about. It's about trying to understand who they are, what their character is, why they are, how they are, and then you can transfer that into your performance. That's what Stanislavski is about. That's what he believes in. He believes that if you don't understand your character before you go on stage, or the other characters, you're not going to be realistic or natural in the way they perform. So as soon as you know it, you're more, it's more instinctive.
It's like in real life. If you know the one you're meeting and you can relate to who that person is, it's much easier to relate.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a really good point. Anything?
It's kind of not unfamiliar for me to be playing some other role, because as an interpreter, I feel there's a lot of this actor work in it. Because I don't know, maybe I have a completely wrong approach for
that makes sense.
To my job as an interpreter, maybe I'm kind of overacting or something like that. But I find it really interesting how kind of I think you're not interpreting the words and you are not interpreting the message, but you are more interpreting the person. So you are kind of
like the body language as well.
Yeah, but I often actually interpret on the phone, and the idea is that I think sometimes even if you understand what the motives of this person is, right? What, for example, what is the main goal for this person in this conversation, right?
Yeah.
If you kind of try to get into his head and understand what is this person actually, what does he want?
Yeah.
What is the idea behind this whole things he's saying? Then you don't even need to say the right words, but as long as you get the message across, right? It's really very.
And that is exactly what acting's about.
Yeah,
That's
so that's
exactly
it.
what it's about. So perfect. No, thank you. That's brilliant.
So what I would have done to prepare is, because I kind of can't see how I would have modeled it without having a person that I could observe.
Mm-hmm.
So I would want to talk to some actors who are at this stage in their life,
Yeah.
and observe them and see.
Yeah.
Because then I can see. It's easy to model this, to copy this.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be possible for me to do it without seeing someone who's like that.
Exactly.
So I need to copy. I need to copy someone.
Exactly. I mean, that's also part of it, is like finding your own way of trying to become someone else. Like some people make up their own story of why these. Well, I think Richard E. Grant just sort of made up a backstory for his character, and then I think what's his name? The other guy, Gunn. He went to go and talk to people living rough, and to try and then inflect how they were living, which is exactly what you're saying.
That's what I would have done.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, I've seen this movie several times, and of course, knowing a little bit about the area, this is the late 60s, when the hippie movement are starting to get a little bit commercialized and fed up, and the drugs are wearing off. So these two characters are obviously into a lot of drug use, and the entire Camden area in London had that area sort of run down and going downhill. Knowing a bit about that will probably help, and of course their experience.
And but what you're saying is like about the environment and the time is exactly what I was saying earlier as well. That's so important when you understand why that was happening to actors at that time specifically. I mean, this doesn't really happen as much today anymore because there's more support. But as you said, there was a lot of there wasn't much. Well, in that time there wasn't as much support, and actors were having a tough time, and drugs were big and that kind of thing. And in the 60s, learning why it was like that in the 60s is so important to then become that character.
Indeed.
Perfect. There we go.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Natalie. I think that's the first place that I would start, is asking questions, having a model, studying that. But I guess in addition to that, I love reading. So, like I read Train Spotting and A Million Little Pieces, which is both about like first-person accounts on doing drugs and all kinds of drugs, LSD, and just like the trips that they would have, the highs, the lows, and then it also shows like this outside perspective on how out of touch with reality they were, but to them it was just like, you kind of understand the motivations and the fact that like these people were so high, it's like all they could think of is when they were gonna get the next high. And so, if you're not going to be able to experience that firsthand, then just having a real account that way.
Yeah, and reading is so important. Like reading back on characters, like when I did my role in Death and the Maiden, there wasn't much else to read rather than the whole play. I mean, we were doing an extract of it for an examining piece. So by reading the whole play, you learn a lot more about the character and where they came from and what happened essentially, and then by sort of going back into other books that were written by the same author in the same time about Pinochet and his dictatorship, you sort of keep understanding more and more and more. So it's about building that picture. Yeah.
I would do research as others too, but I think I would adopt the lifestyle. Like I've read some actors in Hollywood, they just began living like this for half a year, for a year. So probably I would become a squatter. Do a mess, so on, but not only a mess, but to do a mess in your head is not so easy to come back from, as you said, about depression and other things, and now is a lot of social anxiety. A lot of people are experiencing that, and No matter that it's not so much maybe diagnosed, but there are a lot of bipolar people here. And I'm interested how actors can go into bipolar side and do that. And like Tom Hardy, I saw that movie, it was amazing. I couldn't believe he
I know, it's
did
incredible.
those two completely different roles.
Yeah.
And well, so Trainspotting, which you mentioned, I was really amazed at how Evan McGregor, I think he played that. He seems so, innocent actor guy, like sweet and nice, and kind of insane. And I didn't see, after 20 or 10 years, they made another one. I didn't see the second part, so one day maybe I will see that. So for me, that moment, how actors can twist and turn, this one, I don't know how to prepare for that. I don't have any clue. Like in Mulholland Drive, for example, it just something just like changing in a second, microsecond. The whole environment and the emotions, and after the song Gerando, suddenly both actors like in another phase, and it's not so much happening. And suddenly you can smell from the screen that something's different. That the things going on, totally different. New story, a new chapter of the story and so on. So I don't know how to prepare for that, because it's like difficult work to do. But research and maybe squatting and so on. So
good,
it could help to understand surrounding by surrounding myself with all things, maybe I could get into the character on point, how to understand every micro thing.
Exactly, and what you said with squatting is, I can't remember, he acted as Joker.
Joaquin Phoenix, is it?
No,
The last one, but
the one who committed suicide.
Oh,
Heath Ledger?
Heath
that's the
Ledger.
one.
yeah, Heath Ledger.
Now that is an
Yeah.
example of emotion memory where it went wrong. Essentially, like he closed himself off completely from society, just tried to become the Joker, and it just after he finished the movie, it became too much for him. And that's where it becomes dangerous in some ways. Like I was talking with the Stanislavski emotion memory. So yeah, that's the negative side of it, unfortunately. But yeah, also what you said with the when you see a movie and then suddenly you can sort of sense that the mood has changed, or what's going on in the film or that's on screen is changing. Like sometimes it's music, sometimes it's what the characters are doing, and it's all these tiny little things or directorial choices that the director's made that mean you're feeling this, that mean you're thinking this, or like you said, sort of smelling that.
Yeah, something that you just can sense, and especially in those movies which are like pretty linear, nothing much happening. I don't know if you saw recently, there's with Rami Malek that Mr. Robot, and now is the season 4. I saw the episode 7. It's like theatrical, like you're sitting in the theater, and how they're playing very sensitive characters, but both Rami Malek and that Elliot Vigera, if I'm pronouncing it. So both of them, they were so good in that you just kind of have a sense that you are sitting in the theater, you see a play, you see a director, all those decorations and so on.
Yeah.
And the sensitive topic was molesting a child and so on and so on, and how he starts to remember that, what his father did with him. And every single emotion, starting from breathing, talking, voice, ups and downs, and another guy who's trying to crash him emotionally in kidnapping, kind of, that Mr. Roberts psychiatrist. So it's like everything's so arranged, and I at first thought, oh my god, what is that? Another Hollywood crap. But no, the acting of that episode was something. So it's like, wow, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, it's amazing what they can do on screen.
And also like Tarantino did on screen with the Hateful Eight, I didn't feel it was a movie. For me it was like more also like a play, like in the theater.
Yeah.
Surrounding doesn't change so much, but you have this and so then like kind of classical.
Yeah, that's really good. Thank you. Any ideas?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's hard to follow all that.
Yeah. But I mean, like, of course, the research on the characters and try to put your mind and everything into, put your mind to become them and not yourself anymore. That's an important thing. But also, as you were talking about, more of the physical things to make your own situation and your personal life into maybe how they live. Like, for example, for this scene, like, what if I was going to shoot this scene? Yeah, they're obviously affected by drugs, they're stressed, they don't have money, they're probably really hungry. So maybe for the last 24 hours before playing the scene, maybe I shouldn't eat that much. Maybe I should try to sleep a little less. So those internal instincts of your body kind of get crazy.
Maybe not for
you know?
not for 60 hours, but
Maybe not for 60 hours. You catch what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, but that is what actors do. I think. I don't know if any of you have watched Peaky Blinders, the new series, BBC series, sort of like a gangster series. Tom Hardy plays a gangster in it, and he said before he plays it, he drinks half a bottle of whiskey every time. That's just what he does to try and get in character, and it works. No, but it's those kind of habits and those kind of things that it then becomes a psychological thing as well, where you link that half a bottle of whiskey, drinking it, with your character, and then you're in character. It's not even so much about the whiskey anymore. It's about what you perceive after you've had that half a bottle. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
I was wondering how much time do you usually have to prepare for a part?
Like film, theatre.
I mean, in your case, I guess like most people takes like months or.
Yeah, for films they have like a really long time. For plays, it's not as much because you don't have they just don't give you as much time because there's not as many little things. Like in one scene in a movie, there could be 90 different segments that the directors ask you to do. Like move your face here, look at him there, look nervous in this point, in this frame, essentially, like frame by frame, how they're going to film it. So it's a lot harder to do that in a short space of time, whereas when you're acting, it's more about you and the rehearsal. The rehearsal is the most important thing, so it's you going home, reading about the character, learning about what he does, what he is, maybe making a backstory, and then so that when you're on stage, you're comfortable playing that character. So it's shorter performing and longer filming. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and what about did you get external like coaches or like some? Because I've seen some movies that they need like I saw an interview of a Spanish actor that she also made a movie about the time of Pinochet in Chile, and she said she needed to improve because he has a Spanish accent, so she has to have a Chilean accent. Yeah. So she went to a logoped and like a coach training for that. So.
You know the movie A Star Is Born?
Yeah.
The most recent one. He had to. I actually met his singing coach and I was talking to him about it. Sorry, what's his name? The actor. Yeah, exactly. Terrible names. But he was training 6 months straight, just to sort of train himself into singing, because it's a whole new muscle set. Your diaphragm, your muscles in here that no one really knows what you're meant to do with them until you start singing, and you don't really know that you have them until you start singing. And so it took him 6 months of every day doing breathing exercises for half an hour, and then doing some singing in the evening, to even get to a level where he was, I mean, he's not Lady Gaga, but you know, that he could sing in front of people and be respectful. So, like, there's a lot of dedication that goes into it, like accents, singing, learning about where you're going to be, what your environment is. So it's a lot of effort.
Yeah. Like the Dr. House, British guy was playing Dr. House. He had to make American accent, everything. Kind of famous, those TV show. That TV show, 8 seasons something. And then he had to go to walk with a stick
Yeah.
though he has no, disability. So after the show was finished, he still was walking with 80 years of something. Well, maybe not of shooting, with 60 or something.
Yeah.
Like that, so it's like
Yeah, you get that. Sometimes they sort of try and live as their character, and they can't get out of the habit afterwards. They just keep being that character, and it takes them a while to sort of be themselves again, which is crazy. Yeah.
I probably would have done as some people said, some research and probably some psychological studies as well. So.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
I don't know much about acting. I'm not an actor, so what you see is what you get, basically.
I love that.
Yeah, we know.
You could have played the monk.
I'm very straightforward. I don't like acting as well. So, but what I do, I can relate to my photography work. When I need to photograph or portrait certain people, I do my research, see what they do, read about them, just to understand them, to make a better portrait. I don't always do that. It's just for certain people. More often when it's like commercial.
For when you're like making a composition.
Yeah.
So then it's sort of the meaning comes out of it. That's exactly the same as film. So it's perfect. Yeah.
It relates.
Yeah, exactly.
But you always say you need like real emotions in somebody to take an authentic photograph, right?
Sometimes it depends a little bit.
Do
That's what I try to do.
Do you remember that photo we did of you first? And then we also took a photo of me, but because I'd just done that, you remember we did that?
Yeah, you were horrible.
Yeah, I was because
It was still acting.
yeah, because he had this great photo of Leo.
It's just exhausted.
Yeah, and I'd just done this monologue where my character's just lost his brother, so it's very emotional. And I was so drained afterwards that he took a portrait of me, and I just looked blank. There was no emotion in my face whatsoever.
No, excellent. That was my problem.
Yeah.
And then for me, it's completely useless.
Yeah. I was useless. Yeah.
So
I think. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know how to do it, but I'm more practical, so I would drink a lot of coffee. Because I'm drinking espresso, so very little food, and I would take the photography.
I was thinking regular day at work.
Yeah.
I was thinking in the drugs, I just didn't wanted to say it.
Yeah, I wouldn't do the drugs though, but
Whiskey?
the whiskey, I would do the whiskey, yeah.
Then Anonymous Alcoholics group.
Alright, thank you. No, that was so interesting. Thank you so much.
One thing I was thinking that it would have been much more useful or easy if I was going to be one of those actors to actually practice the whole play with the other guy 100 times instead of coming with everything prepared and then do it for the first time. That would be a nightmare, because I wouldn't know the dynamics of when I'm moving this way and where's he moving, and the voice levels, and
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean,
collaboration.
a lot of actors don't like going into it, just off the bat, cold turkey essentially. So a lot of them prefer to sort of do one scene of 10 lines, just sort of learn that. That's Frodo from The Hobbit. He did that when he was doing that film. He would only do 10 lines, learn it, sort of be that, sort of know what he was doing, what he was feeling in those 10 lines. Then they'd shoot it, and then he'd go again from the script. So it's sort of in stages, if that makes sense. And then there's other actors who would just become the character, have the lines learned in their head, and try and be the character on stage and just let it be natural while they're acting.
On the go.
Yeah. So it depends.
And when they make a film, I always wondered, I shouldn't, but maybe I should be wrong, that they have different sites in Paris and London and whatever.
Yeah.
And then do they, and the London part appears 3 times in the movie, but with 10 years difference or something. I guess they are practical, so when they are there, they do all the filming there first and then they move.
Exactly.
And then it's
then you have to sort of,
it's more challenging.
Exactly, because you're sort of in it. You've read the script. Obviously, everyone's read the script before they start shooting. But when you're sort of got 3 different scenes in London at 3 different times, you have to sort of think of what's happened, you know, in the last scene. What was I doing in Paris or wherever I've been, you know? So then you've got to suddenly re-establish where you're at in the character sort of like arc, essentially, because every character usually in a movie has an arc where they start, how they grow, and where they end up in the end. Unless you watch Game of Thrones, which was just a mess. But yeah, exactly. I mean, then the actor has to really then go back and think, oh shit, I've got to go and be him at this time again, you know, in this part of my acting.
And then you see that castle outside London or wherever is in the summertime, spring and wintertime.
Okay.
And I also wonder, do they wait to start at one time? Or do they just okay, we're here now, we're starting now, so we just take the last end and start with, because now it's snow.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the weather it's kind of difficult, but for example, with Lord of the Rings, I'll go back to it, with the New Zealand, because of New Zealand in the mountains it's snowy, and down in the valleys it's not, so a lot of the filming they could essentially film it all at the same time, but it looked as though they were in different seasons. They could do that, or you can use a green screen, which they also did in Lord of the Rings, so it's like, it depends. But then with snowing in summer in Britain, it's kind of different, or in London, you'd probably have to go at that time of the year.
You mentioned the green screen, that's where you just subtract the whole background.
Yeah, so some actors hate it, a lot of actors hate it, because you're just acting in front of nothing. Or, I don't know, when you have an actor in a movie when they're sort of on a dragon, for example, there's no dragon. So you have to pretend you're riding the dragon, and then they have sort of a completely a green model that you're sort of riding and it moves, and then a green screen behind it, and then they can create the background. So with CGI, with
You get the good old Cherokee.
more about this.
Telephone.
Yeah. Exactly. And then you see the videos on YouTube afterwards of them sitting on these green things and you're like, what is going on? So yeah.
The Revenant, when they were shooting Alejandro Inarritu and The Revenant with Leonardo DiCaprio, we got Oscar finally for that. So I was surprised. The mountains had no snow where they wanted to shoot initially, like in Canada, but they had to go to Argentina instead to find snow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
sometimes it's just like that. So you find location and some.
You have to adapt. Yeah.
We could have gone to Stavanger because we had all 4 seasons in the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah,
So we had to wait for like 10 minutes.
Yeah. Just come in July.
Yeah, precisely.
Right. So we've taken quite a long time, so sorry. Do you want to go and start your thing?
But Sam, that was great. Thanks so much. Really useful. Yeah.